He was a former Navy SEAL hiding from the noise of the world, guarding a frozen stretch of forest no one wanted, until they tried to take it by force. On a brutal winter morning, he was left bound in the snow beside his two loyal dogs, meant to be a warning. His life should have ended there. It didn't, because a young journalist stepped into the storm and refused to walk away. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, please subscribe. Winter came early to Redwood Valley, Montana, settling over the mountain town with a quiet, unforgiving certainty. At dawn, the sky was a muted slate gray, heavy with low clouds that pressed down on the valley like a lid. Snow lay thick across rooftops and pine-lined roads, muffling sound and slowing the world to a careful crawl. The town itself, small, practical, and weather-worn, still slept, its single main street marked by dark storefronts, frost-clouded windows, and a lone snowplow parked beside the gas station. Beyond the last plowed turn, civilization gave way abruptly to forest. Out there, the wilderness did not care who you were. The wind tore through the tall pine and fir trees, shaking loose curtains of powder that whispered down from the branches. Somewhere deep among those trees, in a clearing barely touched by morning light, Eli Mercer knelt in the snow. He was unconscious, but even in that state, he did not look broken. Eli was young, late 20s, with the build of a man forged by years of discipline rather than comfort. His shoulders were broad beneath a heavy winter jacket, now soaked through and stiff with ice. Lean muscle filled out his frame, the kind earned through endless repetition, cold mornings, and bodies pushed past exhaustion. His dark hair, normally kept short and utilitarian, was plastered to his forehead by melting snow. A day's worth of stubble traced his jaw, giving his sharp features a rough edge. There was nothing soft about him, not even now. Thick ropes bound him tightly. Several strands wrapped around his chest and arms, pinning his wrists behind his back. More rope cinched his legs, forcing him into a kneeling position that drove the cold straight through denim and into bone. The knots were deliberate, tight, efficient, and cruel. Whoever had tied them knew how to restrain a grown man properly. A shallow gash at Eli's temple had bled freely before the cold claimed it, the blood frozen into a dark streak against pale skin. On either side of him lay his dogs. Closest was Kodiak, a large German shepherd with a heavy sable and black coat. Even motionless, he looked powerful, built thick through the chest and shoulders, a dog bred for endurance and protection. His legs were bound together with rope, his muzzle resting against the snow. Each breath came shallow and slow, a faint puff of mist in the freezing air. Beside him was Ranger, slightly leaner, his coat darker, his ears usually sharp and expressive. Now they lay flattened against his head. A faint whine slipped from his throat once, weak and broken, before he stilled again. Both dogs were unconscious, their bodies angled instinctively toward their owner, as if even bound and beaten, they refused to leave him exposed. The men who had done this were gone. Their absence was written plainly across the clearing. Heavy boot prints cut deep into the snow, moving away toward the tree line. Tire tracks, wide, aggressive, scarred the edge of the clearing where an SUV had reversed in haste. The tracks were fresh, their edges still sharp, untouched by drifting snow. Whoever they were, they hadn't lingered. They had delivered their message and left the mountain to finish the rest. This had not been random violence. Eli Mercer owned the land surrounding this stretch of forest. Hundreds of rugged acres passed down through his family, untouched by development and fiercely protected. Over the past year, offers had come, then pressure, then thinly veiled threats. Men in clean jackets had spoken about opportunity and progress, about luxury winter lodges and private resorts. Eli had said no every time. He had not expected the answer to come bound in rope and ice. Several miles away, unaware of just how close she was to the edge of something deadly, Maren Holt pushed deeper into the forest. She moved carefully, boots crunching softly through fresh snow, breath fogging in front of her face. Maren was 26, slight in build but stubborn in posture, the kind of woman who looked like she belonged behind a desk until you watched her refuse to turn back. Her chestnut brown hair was pulled into a messy braid that brushed the collar of her winter coat. Her cheeks were flushed red from the cold, and her green eyes flicked constantly between the trees, alert and uneasy. Maren was a freelance investigative journalist from Denver, drawn to Redwood Valley by rumors that didn't quite add up. Locals whispered about land deals pushed through too fast, properties bought under pressure, permits approved without explanation. It wasn't flashy corruption, it was quiet. That made it dangerous and interesting. A camera hung from her neck, the screen cracked in a spiderweb pattern from a fall the day before when she'd slipped on ice near a ravine. It still worked mostly. She had tested it twice that morning. Good enough? She wasn't supposed to be this far out. She'd told herself she would turn back at the next ridge, then the next. The forest swallowed distance easily, and before she realized it, the town felt impossibly far behind her. The wind shifted, carrying a sound that made her stop cold. At first she thought it was an animal, an elk, maybe, or a deer caught in brush. Then she heard it again, a rough, uneven exhale. Human. Her heart began to pound. Maren moved slowly, senses sharpened by fear, following the sound through the trees. The clearing opened suddenly before her, and the sight stole the breath from her lungs. A man kneeling in the snow, bound. 2 dogs tied beside him, blood frozen against skin, ropes everywhere. "Oh my God," she whispered, the words barely audible over the wind. Panic surged hot and dizzy, but instinct, honed by years of reporting in places where things went wrong, forced her to move. She dropped her pack and knelt beside the man, fingers shaking as she pressed 2 fingers to his neck. A pulse. Weak, but there. She checked the dogs next, leaning close, pressing her ear to Kodiak's side, then Ranger's. Both were alive. Someone had done this recently. That thought landed heavy in her chest. Maren looked back toward the trees, suddenly convinced she was being watched. The forest offered nothing but shadow and moving snow. Her phone showed no signal. She was alone. She could leave, run back toward town, get help. She didn't. Working fast despite numb fingers, she pulled a small utility knife from her pack and began sawing through the rope around the man's arms. The fibers were thick, stiff with ice. She couldn't free him completely. Not quickly, but she loosened enough to ease the pressure and restore circulation. She did the same for the dogs, cutting and loosening, whispering apologies she wasn't sure they could hear. Snow began to fall harder. A few 100 yards away, half hidden behind a stand of fir trees, she remembered seeing a derelict hunting cabin earlier that morning. Old, abandoned, but it had walls, a roof, and some protection from the wind. Getting all 3 there felt impossible. She scavenged what she could. An old tarp frozen into the snow near the cabin site, a length of discarded rope, and fashioned a crude drag. It was slow, brutal work. She moved them one at a time, resting often, her muscles screaming, her breath tearing at her chest. More than once she thought she would have to stop. She didn't. By the time she hauled the last of them inside the cabin, her gloves were soaked, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She shoved the warped door closed, braced it with a fallen beam, and slid down against the wall, chest heaving. 3 lives lay on the cabin floor. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. Inside, in the dim, frozen quiet, the first fragile thread was drawn between 2 strangers. One who had survived war and one who had just stepped into it. Eli, Mercer woke to pain before sound, a deep pulsing ache that radiated from his wrists, shoulders, and skull. Cold lingered beneath it, stubborn and invasive, seeping through layers of fabric and skin. His body reacted before his mind fully surfaced. Muscles tightened, breath slowed, his senses sharpened. He did not move. His eyes remained closed as he took inventory. Wood beneath his back, uneven, a faint draft against his cheek, the smell of damp pine, old smoke, and frozen earth. No immediate sound of footsteps. No engines. No voices. The air felt still, but not safe. When he finally opened his eyes, he did so a fraction at a time. The cabin was small and crude, its walls made of rough timber darkened by age. A single window was half covered with frost, pale winter light seeping through in dull bands. The door opposite him was reinforced by a fallen beam wedged awkwardly across it. Whoever had done that hadn't been trained. But they had been desperate. Eli's hands twitched, testing range of motion. The ropes were gone. Circulation had returned, though his wrists burned where they'd been bound. He shifted slightly, keeping his movements controlled. Then he saw the dogs. Kodiak lay on the floor a few feet away, stretched on his side, chest rising and falling shallowly. Ranger was curled closer to the wall, his muzzle resting against his forelegs, ears limp. Neither stirred. A flash of anger cut through Eli sharper than the pain. He pushed himself upright in one smooth motion, instantly alert, scanning the room. A woman stood near the far wall, shoulders tense, a flashlight clenched in her gloved hand like a weapon she wasn't sure how to use. She froze when he moved. "You're awake," she said, voice tight but steady. Eli turned toward her, eyes assessing. She was young, mid-20s, bundled in a heavy coat dusted with snow. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her gaze held firm. Green eyes. Brown hair pulled back in a loose braid. She looked like she hadn't slept, but she hadn't run either. "Where am I?" His voice came out low, rough, controlled. "In a hunting cabin," she answered, "about a quarter-mile from where I found you." "Found you?" Eli swung his legs under him, ignoring the protest from his body, and planted his boots on the floor. His posture shifted. Upright, guarded, balanced. Distance, angles, exit points. "You untied me," he said. Not a question. She nodded. "As much as I could. I dragged you here, one by one." His eyes flicked briefly to her hands, reddened, raw, trembling slightly now that the adrenaline had faded. "Why?" he asked. She hesitated only a second. "Because you were going to freeze to death." Silence settled between them, thick and watchful. "My name's Marin," she added after a moment. "Marin Holt. I'm a journalist." That earned her another look, sharper this time. "What were you doing out there?" Eli asked. "Following a lead I shouldn't have. Followed alone," she said. A tired, almost humorless breath escaped her. "There have been stories, land deals, people pressured to sell, properties changing hands quietly. I came to Redwood Valley to dig." His jaw tightened at the name forming unspoken between them. "Landon Pike?" he said. Marin's eyebrows lifted a fraction. "You know him." "I've met him," Eli replied flatly. "More than once?" He pushed himself to his feet and crossed the small space to Kodiak, kneeling beside the dog. His hand hovered for a second before settling gently against the shepherd's thick fur. Warm, alive, still. "They poisoned them?" Marin asked quietly. "No," Eli said. "If they wanted them dead, they'd be dead." His fingers traced Kodiak's flank, checking for wounds. They wanted to make a point. Ranger let out a faint breath, his chest hitching. Eli swallowed the surge of relief and anger that followed. "They came to you because of the land," Marin said. Eli stood slowly. "Pike's been trying to buy it for over a year. Calls at first, then visits, then men who smiled too much and talked about progress. I said no every time." His eyes darkened. Didn't think he'd send people into the woods? Marin shifted, glancing toward the frosted window. They didn't want to be seen. Masks, gloves, professional. That's what worries me, Eli said. This wasn't intimidation by amateurs. He moved to the door and crouched, studying the seams, the snow packed along the threshold. His fingers brushed the latch, the beam bracing it. They could come back, Marin said. They might already be nearby, Eli replied. Her breath caught. I saw tracks earlier, big boots, too large to be mine. He straightened and met her gaze. Where? Behind the cabin, and closer to the trees than they need to be. Eli nodded once. Information filed away. Marin reached into her pack and pulled out her camera, the cracked screen catching the weak light. I took some photos before everything. She grimaced. The screen's damaged, but the files might still be intact. I'll need time to recover them. You should have left, Eli said. She looked at him steadily. So should you. Something shifted between them. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. I can't leave, Eli continued. This land belonged to my father, and his father before him. If I walk away now, Pike wins. Marin swallowed. If you stay, this gets worse. I know. They stood in silence, listening to the wind press against the cabin walls. You saved my life, Eli said finally. And theirs. His gaze dropped briefly to the dogs. That makes you a target now. Marin's shoulders squared, fear flickering briefly before resolve took its place. I didn't come here to run from the truth. Eli studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Then we watch each other's backs, he said. Outside, the forest remained still, but its silence felt wrong, too deliberate, too heavy. Inside the cabin, an uneasy alliance took shape, forged not by trust, but by necessity. The pain in Eli Mercer's body dulled to a background hum as the hours passed, replaced by something sharper and more useful. Focus. He moved with care inside the cabin, testing each joint, each breath, gauging what the cold and the beating had taken from him. His strength was still there. Bruised, slowed, but intact. Years of conditioning did not disappear overnight. Outside, the light had shifted. The sky pressed lower, clouds thickening into a dense, restless ceiling. Snow whispered against the cabin walls, soft now, but carrying a promise that felt heavier by the minute. A storm was building. Eli watched the tree line through the frost-laced window, eyes narrowing as the wind changed direction. Weather like this closed options fast. It erased tracks, it buried evidence, and it gave cover to people who wanted to disappear. They'll come back, he said quietly. Marin Holt looked up from the table where she had spread out her gear. Her gloves lay discarded beside her, fingers still red and stiff as she worked at the cracked camera with a small multi-tool. You're sure? Not because they failed, Eli replied. Because they didn't finish. Kodiak shifted on the floor, letting out a low, uneasy sound. Ranger stirred beside him, legs trembling as he tried to pull himself closer to his brother. Both dogs were awake now, though neither had the strength to stand for long. Their eyes tracked Eli constantly, alert despite their weakness. Eli crouched beside them, resting a steadying hand on Kodiak's neck. The shepherd's ears twitched, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air creeping in through the cabin's gaps. "What is it, boy?" Eli murmured. Kodiak's head lifted, slow but purposeful. He sniffed again, then turned his muzzle toward the back of the cabin, toward the slope rising into denser forest. Marin noticed it too. "That's not normal behavior, is it?" "No," Eli said. "That's recognition." Kodiak pushed himself to his feet, unsteady but determined, and took a few steps toward the door. Ranger followed, limping, staying close. Eli stood, decision already forming. If there's something out there, we find it before the snow does. Marin hesitated. What if it's a trap? Then we'll know, Eli said, and knowing beats guessing. They layered up quickly, minimizing noise, stepping back into the forest as the light dimmed further. The cold bit deeper now, wind threading through the trees with growing urgency. Kodiak led, nose low, moving with careful confidence despite his injuries. Ranger stayed close to Eli's leg, every step guarded. They didn't go far. Less than a quarter-mile from the cabin, Kodiak stopped near a stand of firs where the snow thinned unnaturally. The scent hit Eli next. Faint, metallic, wrong. Chemical. Marin wrinkled her nose. That's not fuel. No, Eli agreed. It's cleaner than that. They brushed snow aside with gloved hands and found a concealed hatch half buried beneath branches and frozen earth. The wood was new, too new. Eli eased it open. Inside was a narrow storage pit, reinforced with plywood and tarps. Crates lined the sides, their markings deliberately scraped away. He opened one carefully. Explosives. Not crude, not improvised. Professionally packaged charges sealed against moisture. Another crate held rolled maps, topographical sheets marked with red lines and circled clearings. Architectural sketches followed, crisp and deliberate. Lodges, access roads, utilities. Marin exhaled slowly. This isn't just your land. Eli shook his head. It's a network. The scope of it settled in like a weight. Multiple properties, remote sites, coordinated development hidden behind shell purchases and intimidation. This was bigger than a single holdout refusing to sell. Snow began to fall harder, thick flakes swirling sideways now. We don't have long, Eli said. This storm will wipe everything. Marin nodded, then reached for her camera again, fingers flying despite the cold. Then we document everything we can. She powered it on, screen flickering before stabilizing. Relief crossed her face. Files are still there. They crouched together as she scrolled through images captured days earlier. Blurry shots of access roads, distant figures near property lines. Then one image sharpened enough to draw breath. A dark SUV parked near Eli's land, plates obscured by snow, the driver half visible through the windshield. Marin froze. I know him, she said. Eli looked at her. From where? Last winter, she said quietly. A wildfire investigation near Bitterroot Ridge. I was asking questions about controlled burns and illegal land clearing. A man approached me. Tall, broad-shouldered, scar along his jaw. He told me to stop digging. She zoomed in on the image, jaw tightening. That's him. A chill unrelated to the cold crawled up Eli's spine. So this isn't contained to Redwood Valley. No, Marin said. It's systemic. Behind them, Kodiak let out a low growl. Not toward the pit, but toward the forest beyond. Ranger stiffened, ears pricked. Eli straightened instantly, scanning the trees. Nothing moved, but the silence had changed, the kind that pressed too close. We go, he said. Now. They covered the hatch carefully, erasing signs of disturbance as best they could. Snow was already doing its part, swallowing their footprints almost as soon as they made them. By the time they reached the cabin, the storm was no longer whispering. It was arriving. Inside, the dogs collapsed onto their bedding, exhausted but alive. Eli secured the door again, reinforcing it further as the wind rose to a howl. Marin sank onto the bench, clutching the camera to her chest. This isn't a story anymore. Eli met her gaze. It never was. Outside, the mountains disappeared behind curtains of white. Somewhere, beyond that, people were moving pieces into place, and the cracks in the snow were beginning to widen. The storm thickened into a living thing by the time they reached Valley Creek. Snow drove sideways through the narrow corridor of trees, the wind screaming down the ravine and shredding sound into fragments. Visibility shrank to shapes and motion, a world reduced to white sheets and dark trunks. Eli felt the terrain under his boots more than he saw it. Ice-slick rock near the water, soft drifts where the creek curved, the subtle rise that offered cover, and the hollow that swallowed noise. Kodiak lifted his head and froze. Ranger mirrored him a heartbeat later. Eli raised a fist. Marin stopped instantly, breath hitching, her camera already up, despite the cold gnawing at her fingers. They weren't alone. The first shot cracked the air from uphill, high, probing, meant to flush prey. Eli dropped low, pulling Marin with him into the lee of a fallen cedar. Snow puffed where the round bit. He counted the echoes, gauged distance, and exhaled once. "They followed our backtrack," he said, voice steady. "Stay here. Do not move unless I pull you." Marin nodded, fear tight in her eyes, resolve tighter. She angled the camera toward the trees, recording through shaking hands. Eli slid away, ghosting downslope until the creek masked his movement. He set his first trap where the snow looked untouched, but hid a shallow cut. Branches layered thin, a bootbreaker waiting. Another he placed near a bend where sound bounced and lied. He didn't rush. Rushing killed. More shots. Closer now. 3 shooters by the cadence, maybe 4. They were spreading, trying to box him in. He answered with 1 shot. Controlled. Precise. Snapping bark inches above a man's head. The return fire came fast and wild. Eli smiled without humor. Fear made noise. He shifted again, using the wind. A thrown rock clattered left. His steps went right. A man barreled into the first trap and went down hard, a curse tearing loose as his rifle skidded. Eli was on him in a blink, wrenching the weapon free and shoving the man into the snow. Zip ties bit into wrists. The man fought, then saw Eli's eyes and stopped. "Quiet," Eli said, "or you bleed." The others hesitated. The storm surged, howling louder, swallowing angles and intention. Another shot snapped past Eli's shoulder. He ducked and fired back, not to hit, but to herd. The men fell into a poor line, each afraid to be the one exposed. Behind the cedar, Marin filmed as a shadow slipped through the trees toward her blind side. Kodiak surged with a low, feral sound, shoulder-checking the man before teeth snapped inches from a throat. The man stumbled, panicked, firing wildly. Ranger barked, echoing thunder off the creek walls. Eli pivoted and fired once, snow exploding at the man's feet. "Down!" The shadow fled, crashing away, fear louder than his boots. The wind rose again, a sudden whiteout. The remaining shooters lost their spacing, their shouts scattered and wrong. One yelled about sirens. None existed, but fear didn't need facts. Another called retreat. The storm made liars of their eyes. Eli made liars of their courage. They withdrew, firing blind, then not at all. Silence came heavy and abrupt, broken only by the creek's buried rush and the dogs breathing. Eli hauled his captive to cover. The man was young, cheeks hollowed by cold and worse choices, a ragged beard icing at the tips. His eyes darted to the trees, to the dogs, to Eli. "What were you guarding?" Eli asked. The man swallowed. "I don't—" Eli opened a pack dropped in the snow. Inside, a portable drive sealed against moisture, folded site maps, and a cheap recorder with a red light blinking. He clicked it on. A voice spilled out, smooth, practiced, threatening. Landon Pike's name surfaced like a knife. The captive sagged. "I didn't know what was on it," he said too fast. "We were told it was leverage." Marin approached carefully, camera still rolling. Snow clung to her lashes, her hands steadied as she framed the evidence. The man, the dogs flanking Eli like sentries. Eli cut the recorder and met her gaze. Something passed there. Fear acknowledged, courage respected. He trusted her with a nod. The storm pressed closer, erasing everything that didn't move. Eli secured the drive and maps, checked the captive's bindings, and scanned the forest once more. No pursuit, no courage left. They moved out together, black snow swirling where gunsmoke had mingled with wind, leaving behind a valley that remembered nothing but silence. They left the forest before midnight. The storm had spent itself in violent bursts and uneasy pauses, leaving the roads half buried and slick with black ice. Eli drove with both hands steady on the wheel, eyes scanning every bend as the headlights carved narrow tunnels through the snow. Maren sat beside him, laptop balanced on her knees, fingers flying despite the cold that seeped through the doors. Kodiak and Ranger lay in the back, bundled in blankets, breaths slow and even. They were stable now, tired, sore, but alive. That was enough. Redwood Valley appeared in fragments at first, the outline of rooftops, the glow of a single all-night diner, the blinking amber of a traffic signal fighting the snowfall. Eli didn't slow until they reached the edge of town, pulling into the lot behind the sheriff's substation where a single light burned over a metal door. Maren looked at him. "Once I send this, there's no pulling it back." Eli nodded. "That's the point." Inside the station, the night deputy on duty was a man in his early 40s with a stocky build and a permanent look of skepticism etched into his square face. His name badge read Tom Calder. He listened without interrupting as Eli laid the evidence on the counter. Hard drive, maps, recorder. While Maren queued up the footage on her screen. Calder's expression changed minute by minute. Doubt gave way to concern. Concern hardened into something colder and more precise. "This goes beyond us," he said finally. "Way beyond." "Then don't sit on it," Maren replied, voice calm but unyielding, "because they won't." Calder didn't argue. He made the calls. By the time dawn threatened the horizon, the quiet town was no longer quiet. Unmarked vehicles rolled in with federal plates dusted white with snow. Men and women in dark coats moved with clipped efficiency, their presence reshaping the air itself. One of them introduced herself as Special Agent Laura Kessick. Tall, sharp-featured, steel-gray eyes that missed nothing. Her hair was pulled back tight, her demeanor precise, all angles and intent. She reviewed the evidence in silence. "This is clean," she said at last, "and it's enough." Landon Pike was arrested before sunrise at his gated property outside town, pulled from a warm bed into cold certainty. By midday, warrants rippled outward. Shell companies exposed, illegal developments frozen, accomplices scrambling too late to disappear. Redwood Valley exhaled. Kodiak and Ranger were taken to a veterinary clinic run by an older man named Dr. Samuel Hargreave, whose hands were steady and voice gentle. He treated them like honored guests, not patients. Stitches, antibiotics, rest. "They'll be back to full strength," he told Eli. "Give it time." Time was something Eli finally felt he had. The days that followed unfolded with a strange, unreal clarity. Reporters arrived. Then more. Maren filed her story in layers, images, audio, verified documents, refusing shortcuts, refusing embellishment. When it ran everywhere. Expose uncovers illegal resort network in Redwood Valley. It was the biggest piece of her career. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt necessary. People in town stopped Eli on the street. Some shook his hand. Others brought food to the cabin without being asked. An elderly woman pressed a knitted scarf into his hands and said nothing at all, her gratitude complete in her eyes. Kodiak and Ranger returned home wearing new collars, thick leather, hand-tooled, each fitted with a small steel tag etched simply, "Loyalty." On the fourth morning after the storm, Eli and Maren climbed Ashford Hill. The snow was already thinning there, broken by patches of dark earth and stubborn grass. The sun crested slowly, pale gold spilling across the valley, catching on frozen branches and turning them briefly into glass. They stood side by side, not touching, close enough to feel warmth anyway. "I didn't plan on staying," Marin said quietly. Eli watched the light stretch across the forest. "Plans change." She smiled at that, not the sharp, driven smile she wore when chasing a lead, but something softer, unguarded. "What will you do now?" she asked. Eli considered the question longer than it deserved. "Stay," he said. "Protect what's left. Help rebuild what was damaged." Marin nodded. "I think I'll write about that too. What happens after the headlines fade?" Behind them, Kodiak and Ranger sat together, alert but relaxed, tails sweeping slow arcs through the snow. The world felt wide again, not dangerous, just honest. The sun climbed higher. Winter loosened its grip. Some battles don't arrive with sirens or uniforms. They come quietly, through pressure, fear, and the slow erosion of what we love. This story is a reminder that courage doesn't always mean charging forward. Sometimes it means standing still, refusing to give up your ground, your values, or the people beside you. It means choosing truth when silence would be easier and protecting what cannot protect itself, whether that's a forest, a community, or a loyal heart that never turns away. In our daily lives, we may never face gunfire or winter storms, but we all face moments where doing the right thing costs something. When that moment comes, may we have the strength to act and the humility to accept help when it arrives. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that integrity still matters. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you. And if you believe in stories about courage, loyalty, and quiet strength, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Sometimes, standing your ground is how the light gets in.